Hello, my name is Scott, and I've, I'm very old, and I'm lucky enough to have had some extraordinary experiences in my life, and to have gone some extraordinary places and met some extraordinary people, and people from time to time will say, you should write a book about this or that or the other thing. And although I've enjoyed those stories and those occasions, and they're dramatic sometimes, and interesting and sordid, in all the right ways sometimes, they don't, they're not the sort of thing that one would share publicly because they involve other people that may not appreciate the story being told or whatnot. So, and in truth, these requests for a book always come from one particular story, and that story, it didn't happen to me, but it did. It was told to me, and so what I can do, what I think is appropriate, is that I can tell the story to you in a way to keep the story alive, because it's very reasonable to assume that everybody else involved is gone, and it's not impossible that other people have heard the story. In fact, the story may not even be true. And I can't, the reason I say that is because I wasn't there. I can't testify as a first-hand witness to any of this. I can just tell you the story the way it was told to me, and I can give you some background information that will hopefully help you to appreciate the environment in which it was told, and it gives some credibility to the teller. And I hope that what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you a series of things that I did experience, things that I was told, to kind of set the stage, and then I'll tell you the story. And it's going to take a minute, and I might even split this into two parts just to help you get through it. So, without any more preamble, here's what it is. In the year of 1989, I was a freshman in college, and I went to Kansas State University, and I was privileged to be in an 8 o'clock in the morning chemistry class that was taught by the head of the chemistry department at Kansas State at the time. Now, the building was called King Hall, and King Hall had 3 floors, and we were on the 3rd floor. And this was the territory, the domain of the head of the chemistry department. He had, he used to say that it was all his, all from corner to corner. He owned the 3rd floor. Now, in practical terms, what does that mean? I couldn't tell you. I can only just remember the bravado. And in his office, he had a life-size picture, or maybe even slightly larger than life-size picture of John Wayne. And I mean from the top of his cowboy hat to the bottom of his cowboy boots, he was the picture of John Wayne, and it took in the entire wall. So that was his role model, really. That was the guy that he wanted to be, was John Wayne. And he wanted us, as his students, to really get into and be involved in what we were doing. He didn't want us to be pencil pushers in an office. And he was very clear when he talked to us that we were going to be the department leaders. We were going to be the people who made a difference. We were not going to be necessarily the people on the bench. In other words, we were going to be the decision makers, the policy writers, and he wanted us to stay out of that ivory tower. That he wanted us to resist that temptation, and he wanted us to be involved, to get his hands on. And so he did. He did in front of us. He would do things like dissolve zinc in sulfuric acid, and put his hands right in the sulfuric acid. And I imagine, of course, that it was diluted sulfuric acid, but the reaction was still very, a volatile reaction, lots of bubbling, lots of frothing. Okay, so, but he had his hands right in there, and he wanted you to know that that was appropriate, that you needed to be involved, directly involved, because it will help you to understand the process and help you to to make better decisions. So he told us. So one of the things that he was involved in was the FDA. He worked for the FDA for a lot of years, and he told us a bunch of FDA stories. And I'll tell you one of those very quickly, just to give you a sense of it. He had been given a very, very small piece of metal, and the law enforcement community had told him, look, we know this is either a piece of a belt buckle or this is filling from a tooth filling. So we need you to determine whether it's belt buckle or tooth filling. But you can't be destructive. You have to do it in a non-destructive way. So he put this to us, as freshmen. What do you do? How do you determine this in a way that's completely non-destructive? Because we have to have it as evidence. It has to be there for the trial. So we were, of course, without clue. We everything that we knew how to do had to do with chemical reactions or instrument methods, and that was all one way or another going to be destructive. So when you have this tiny, tiny, tiny sample and you can't destroy it, well, what do you do? Well, so the solution that he that he proposed to us, and the solution they ended up going forward with, was to do a density study. In other words, to find out the lead, if a tooth filling or mercury amalgam tooth filling would be much more dense than would be the iron or component zinc or nickel plate or whatever it would be that would be belt buckle. So that's what they ended up doing. So that's the kind of out of the box problem solving that he did, that he communicated to us, that he thought was important, that we learned to think in ways that were not typical, that were not just come in and make another batch of cookies kind of a day. It wasn't a cookie cutter, I guess, moment is what you'd probably say. So another one that happened, and again, this is one I can actually say that I was there in the room when this happened, is that he came in one day, and we had an 8 a.m. class, right? So the first people to the building in the morning were supposed to be the graduate students, and they were supposed to get there before 7 because he got there at 7. And he wasn't ever supposed to open the doors because the graduate students are trying to, schmooze, right, their professors. So the last thing they want is for him to be the first one to the building in the morning because they obviously want to be there first. They obviously want to leave last to show their commitment to the organization, the program. So he had not opened the doors, he said, for 30 years. He said, but today I had to open the doors, and he was not happy about that. So he had to call around to these graduate students and find out why they were not there that day. And he had called around, and eventually had come up to one of them had a wife. And the wife explained that they had a party the previous day. And after a while, the story emerged that these chemistry graduate students had wanted to have a party, had wanted to drink ethanol, and I guess I should preface this by saying, I'm going to get a little bit chemistry geeky here for just a minute. Don't worry, it won't take forever. I just want to get it out, so bear with me. So the chemistry graduate students had wanted to have a party, and they'd wanted to have ethyl alcohol at the party. And so, being chemistry graduate students, they decided that they didn't want to have ethyl alcohol that had water in it. They wanted to have ethyl alcohol that was completely dry, because obviously that would be better. And so the best you can buy is Everclear, which is about very approximately 5% water and 95% alcohol. That's really about as good as you can do with normal distillation. And but this was not adequate. I mean, obviously not. And so they had come up with a way of synthesizing alcohol, and by doing it synthetically, not through the normal course of distillation, they were able to synthesize it without any water involved. And as a result of that, they then took that alcohol, drank it at the party, and then were, hungover. So the chemistry professor was pacing around, and he was really hacked off. And he said that this method that he had used, it involved benzene, and that the benzene, unbeknownst to the graduate students, causes the hangovers to be much, 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 much worse than it would be without the benzene, or than it would be through the course of just normal distillation. Now, I tucked that away for a lot of years, and I'd never ever heard anyone ever again refer to benzene and to do with making really pure alcohol. Until just a couple of weeks ago. Just a couple of weeks ago, I saw a video on YouTube, and what he explained was that the benzene could be used to remove the water. So you'd have 95% alcohol, 5% water. You put the benzene in, it associates with the water more strongly than the alcohol does, and then you remove the benzene and you remove the water with it. So you're left with dry alcohol. So it's not a synthesis as much as it is a purification method. So that's fine, but it kind of validates the memory is my point. So this professor, said to these graduate students and told us, the freshmen, which was the first class of the day, the 8 a.m. class, following all of this investigation in the morning, he was still had a head full of steam, and he said to us, if only they had come to me, if only they had asked, because 40 years ago, I did exactly the same thing. And, if they just talked to me, I would have explained it to them, and we could have, done this party a whole lot better. But they had felt bashful and shy about it, and hadn't approached their professor with something that they felt was probably a little bit dodgy. And so he was warning all of us as freshmen, don't do this, avoid this particular pitfall. And so we appreciated that, of course. Now, I think that's probably everything that you need to know for me to move on to the real story. And so the real story is this. He wanted us to be, again, engaged. He wanted us to come to him if we had a problem or if a question, or we wanted to synthesize alcohol and have a great party. He wanted us to come to him and ask, and that he was not going to condemn us, and he's going to be engaged with us in our learning process. And he said, even after you graduate and you're in industry and you're out doing your own thing, and if you have questions, call. He says, please call. He says, I know all this stuff. This is what I'm here for. I'm here to help you. And by way of illustration of that point, he told us this story. Again, he told it the way I'm going to tell you, and he told it in a way that's sincere. Okay? I can't promise you that it's absolutely true. Only I can promise you that this is what he said. That he, when he was an undergraduate, had 4 or 5 friends. And this group of 4, 5, 6 people lived together and studied together and were best of friends. And they, I don't believe they were all chemistry students necessarily, but they all took some similar classes, and they helped each other study, and they helped each other focus. And they sometimes took classes together, and I'm sure sometimes did not. But the important thing is that they were a community, and they had they had jobs on campus. They had jobs working for the professors, setting up the labs, cleaning, grading papers, whatever it is that professors have undergraduates doing. And so they came to know their professors as people beyond that shapeless, nameless person behind the podium. They came to know them as people. So they came to know a lot of the scuttlebutt, a lot of the rumors, and a lot of the stories, and a lot of things that are happening behind the scenes. And so they were going to take anatomy and physiology the next term. And all of them were going to take it. And they knew from their experience with the professors that there was not going to be a cadaver. So I should explain that in years past, cadavers were not routinely available in anatomy classes. I could go on a little bit, but this all happened to me in the year of 1989. And this professor at the time was maybe between 60 and 65. And so if you think, 40 years before that would have been somewhere in the late 40s, okay? So, this gentleman probably had this experience in the late 1940s or very, very early 1950s. So the cadavers just were not available all the time. So they knew they were not going to have a cadaver. And yet they knew that they had students with the caliber such as themselves clearly needed a cadaver. But they weren't going to have one. So they lamented about this, and they thought, and they planned, and they schemed, and they thought, and they did just exactly what you think that they were going to do. They went and stole one, right? They found a recently buried person, and they dug up a cadaver, and they simply provided it. They didn't ask permission to do it. The corpse simply appeared one day in the refrigerated place where the cadaver would be kept in the anatomy lab. It just appeared as of magic, just there. And so the term started, their class began, they went through the class as one normally would. There was not a word said by the professors, not to them, not ever, not in public, not in private. Nothing said, nothing done. Completely unquestioned by the professor, completely unquestioned by everybody else in the class. So it got down to the final exam. And they came in for the final exam. Everybody sits down, and the professor pulls out a list and says, the following individuals will stay after class, and read their names, the names of those 5 or 6 people. These people will stay after the exam. So everybody else leaves. The exam's over. The students stay, and they're all just terrified, of course. And the professor says, you are no longer my students, and I'm no longer your teacher. So here's what I have to tell you, that was my daughter, and you have to put her back. And so they did. They put her back. And the professor that's telling the story wanted us to know the degree of dedication that this particular professor had to his students, that he would proceed in that situation for the betterment of the students, that he understood that this was for the betterment of the students, and to not say a word or blink. And he wanted us to know that this is the kind of dedication that the teachers there have, and that the teachers expect us to come to them with problems, and that they will dedicate themselves to our benefit. And now, just in closing, I wish I could tell you his name, but I have forgotten it. Unfortunately, it's gone in the midst of time. But I can tell you that he was the head of the chemistry department when I was there, starting in 1989, and at Kansas State University. I can't tell you that he went to Kansas State University, so I can't say that he was suggesting the story took place there. I mean, I don't know where he went to his undergraduate school. He didn't. I don't know that he said. If he did say, it's long, long gone. But he did tell us the story as if it really happened to him. And he was the sort of guy that his level of engagement was such that I honestly believed it at the time. I believed it absolutely sincerely at the time. And I wasn't the only one. The whole class just gasped at the conclusion. And there was no hint that it was nothing but absolutely sincere when he told the story. So I was at the K-State campus a few years ago and walked through King Hall. And it's the first time I'd been there, since the 1990s. And the building smelled the same, looked the same. The John Wayne poster's not on the wall anymore. But I did meet. It was in the summertime. Very, very, very few people. But there was a graduate student around or two. But they didn't know who he was. I did ask, and they didn't know. I'm sure there's records somewhere. I'm sure that an internet sleuth could uncover the name, but I don't know the name. I wish I could tell you, but I just don't know it. He was an absolutely engaging professor, as you might imagine, and I remember him fondly, much more than many other professors. And I thank you for the time, the opportunity to tell the story. Be good.